In 1941, a clandestine workshop in Hertfordshire, British engineers unveiled their newest sabotage weapon to Special Operations Executive Commanders. The device looked wrong, disturbingly wrong. It was a dead rat, skinned, stuffed with plastic explosive, and sewn back together to look freshly deceased. Everyone who saw it understood the concept immediately, but the execution made them deeply uncomfortable. This was not a conventional weapon. This was something that exploited human disgust as an operational advantage. The explosive rat would never detonate in combat. Yet SOE would later assess it as one of their most successful psychological warfare operations of the entire war. Britain faced an impossible problem. In 1941, German forces occupied France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. The Wehrmacht controlled thousands of factories, rail lines, power stations, and part facilities across Europe. Conventional bombing campaigns could destroy industrial targets, but required massive resources and cost hundreds of aircrew lives. Britain needed sabotage, acts of destruction carried out silently behind enemy lines by agents who could disappear into occupied populations. The Special Operations Executive was established July 22, 1940, with a mandate from Prime Minister Winston Churchill to, in his words, set Europe ablaze. Headquarters operated from 64 Baker Street in London under the cover name Inter-Services Research Bureau. SOE recruited agents from occupied nations, trained them in sabotage techniques, and infiltrated them back into their home countries to organize resistance networks. But agents needed weapons, not rifles or grenades. Those were too obvious to transport and too dangerous to store. They needed devices that could pass German checkpoints, hide in plain sight, and destroy critical infrastructure without betraying the saboteur's identity. SOE established a network of research stations throughout England to develop these specialized weapons. Station 9 at Welwyn developed explosive devices and timers. Station 12 at Aston House near Stevenage, commanded by Major Wood, specialized in industrial sabotage equipment. Station 15 at the Thatched Barn in Borehamwood handled camouflage work led by Lieutenant Colonel J. Elder Wills, a former film art director whose Hollywood experience proved invaluable for creating convincing disguises. These stations employed chemists, engineers, carpenters, metalworkers, and specialists with unusual skills. People who could think unconventionally about how to hide explosives in everyday objects. The challenge was fundamental. German security forces searched luggage, inspected cargo, and questioned anyone carrying suspicious items. SOE needed devices that appeared so ordinary, so inherently worthless, that Germans would ignore them completely. The answer was to disguise explosives as things people actively wanted to dispose of, objects so unpleasant that guards would wave them through without inspection. Dead animals qualified perfectly. The explosive rat concept emerged from this logic. Rats infested every industrial facility in Europe. Boiler rooms, coal storage areas, ship holds, locomotive sheds, factory basements all contained dead rodents. No one questioned finding a dead rat near a coal pile. More importantly, no one examined a dead rat closely. Human instinct demanded immediate disposal. The stoker's reflex was automatic: shovel the dead rat into the furnace and forget about it. That reflex would become the detonation mechanism. Development began at Station 12 in 1941. The procurement process itself demonstrated SOE's attention to operational security. An SOE officer procured approximately 100 rat carcasses by posing as a student who needed specimens for London University laboratory experiments. The supplier, likely a medical or educational supply company, never questioned the order. Dead rats for anatomical study were a routine request. The choice of rats was deliberate beyond mere availability. Rats were universally present in industrial environments. They thrived in the same spaces SOE wanted to target: coal storage areas, boiler rooms, warehouses, ship holds. A dead rat in these locations raised zero suspicion. Construction required delicate work and unconventional expertise. Station 12's personnel included specialists with relevant experience from civilian industries. One worker was reportedly a former bacon handler from Sainsbury's grocery chain who possessed the precise touch needed for working with animal tissue. The construction process followed exacting steps.
Each rat was carefully skinned with surgical tools to preserve the hide's integrity. The internal organs were removed and disposed of. The empty body cavity was measured to determine the maximum volume of explosive that could be concealed while maintaining the natural external contours. The plastic explosive was molded by hand to match the internal shape, compressed to eliminate air pockets that might create suspicious bulges or irregular weight distribution. Then the skin was sewn back with surgical precision using fine thread and small stitches placed along natural body seams where they would be least visible. The goal was absolute authenticity at every inspection level. If a German guard glanced at the device, he had to see nothing but a dead rat. If he picked it up, the weight and texture had to feel correct. Only if he cut it open would the deception fail, and no one dissects a dead rat in a cold storage area. Quality control was essential. Each finished rat was inspected to verify the external appearance matched a naturally deceased rodent. The texture had to be correct, not too stiff, not too pliable. The weight had to correspond to a rat of that size. The tail had to hang naturally. Every detail mattered because a single suspicious element could compromise an agent's cover and lead to arrest, interrogation, and the rolling up of an entire resistance network. The explosive was Nobel 808 plastic explosive, a green plastic-like substance with a distinctive almond smell, developed by Nobel Chemicals Limited before the war. Nobel 808 became SOE's standard explosive because it was safe to handle, stable during transport, inert until detonated by a primer, and moldable into any shape. The material could be formed to match the internal contours of the rat's body cavity, maximizing the amount of explosive concealed while maintaining the natural external appearance. Technical specifications were documented in SOE training materials. The prepared device measured approximately 230 millimeters in length, excluding the tail. Each rat contained a number 27 detonator, a time pencil fuse designated switch number 10 with color-coded delays ranging from 10 minutes to 24 hours, a standard number 6 primer, and a copper tube igniter with safety fuse as an alternative ignition method. The exact weight of explosive per rat was never recorded in classified documents, though SOE noted that a rat could contain only a small amount of explosive. The destructive power relied not on the primary blast, but on triggering a catastrophic secondary explosion when a pressurized steam boiler ruptured. The detonation mechanism operated through two modes. Primary ignition was heat-triggered. When thrown into a furnace, the extreme temperature would ignite the fuse and detonate the plastic explosive within seconds or minutes depending on the heat intensity. Secondary ignition used the pencil fuse for timed detonations in situations where agents could place the device but wanted delayed activation. The pencil fuse employed a glass ampule containing copper chloride solution that corroded through a restraining wire at a predictable rate, releasing a spring-loaded striker that fired the detonator. Production details remain incomplete in available records. Approximately 100 rats were prepared in the initial batch. Manufacturing location was Station 12 at
Aston House. The timeline indicates completion by late 1941 or early 1942. No evidence exists of additional production runs after the first shipment. Each device was packaged in lightweight crates designed to hold 10 to 20 rats concealed within legitimate cargo for parachute drops, submarine infiltration, or overland smuggling into occupied territories. The operational concept was elegant in its simplicity, but carefully planned in execution. Agents would distribute explosive rats near coal supplies, beside industrial boilers throughout occupied France and Belgium. The selection of target facilities followed strategic priorities. Locomotive boiler rooms received primary focus because steam engines powered Germany's entire logistics network, moving troops, ammunition, food, and equipment across occupied Europe. A single locomotive disabled in a critical junction could disrupt supply lines for days. Factory furnaces powering industrial production represented secondary targets, particularly facilities manufacturing war materials such as steel, chemicals, and munitions. Power station boilers generating electricity for German military facilities and occupied cities created cascading effects when destroyed, halting multiple operations simultaneously. Ship boilers in occupied ports, particularly those servicing German naval vessels and merchant shipping, could strand vessels and delay departures. U-boat pen infrastructure included coal-fired pumping stations and workshops that sustained submarine operations. Railroad coal storage areas where locomotives refueled offered high-value targets because a single explosion could contaminate the entire coal supply, forcing Germans to laboriously inspect every piece before use. The geographic focus was occupied France and Belgium primarily because SOE had established networks capable of receiving and distributing the devices through existing channels. Agents in these territories had demonstrated competence in handling explosives, maintaining operational security, and selecting appropriate targets. The distribution logistics were carefully planned. Explosive rats would be packaged in lightweight crates designed to hold 10 to 20 rats each, small enough for a single agent to carry, but large enough to supply multiple operations. The crates would be concealed within legitimate cargo for 3 types of infiltration. Parachute drops during nighttime operations would deliver crates to resistant cells in rural areas using the same supply routes that brought weapons and radio equipment. Submarine infiltration along the French coast would land crates with agents being inserted for long-term operations, taking advantage of SOE's cooperation with the Royal Navy's Special Operations Flotillas. Overland smuggling through neutral countries and porous borders would move crates gradually into occupied territories, disguised as trade goods or hidden in vehicles with concealed compartments. Deployment required minimal specialized training, a critical advantage given the time constraints on agent preparation. Agents needed only basic handling instructions. Place the rats among coal piles where they would appear naturally present. Position them near boiler room entrances where stokers would discover them during routine work. Avoid placing them in visible locations where German security personnel might spot them before workers did. Never place multiple rats in a single location, which might trigger suspicion. Space deployments across different facilities and timeframes to prevent pattern recognition. The beauty of the design was its passive nature. No agent needed to be present when the device detonated. No complex timing calculations were required. No specialized tools were necessary. The enemy's own predictable behavior, refined by decades of industrial practice, became the activation mechanism. A German stoker or a French forced laborer working for the Germans would discover the dead rat, experience natural disgust at vermin contaminating the workspace, and immediately shovel it into the furnace to dispose of it. This reaction was culturally universal, transcending nationality. Heat would trigger detonation. The small explosive charge, perhaps equivalent to a hand grenade, would rupture the boiler's pressure vessel at a weak point, such as a seam or rivet line. Escaping steam at high pressure and temperature would cause a massive secondary explosion. As the sudden pressure release tore through the boiler structure, the explosion would destroy the boiler beyond field repair, kill or severely injure nearby personnel, damage surrounding equipment, and halt industrial operations for weeks or months while replacement boilers were manufactured, transported, and installed. The psychological impact on surviving workers would reduce productivity even after repairs were completed, as personnel became nervous around boilers and hesitant to approach coal piles. If you're enjoying this investigation into unconventional British engineering, consider subscribing. It helps the channel and ensures you don't miss the next one. The operational history of explosive rats is brief and paradoxical. No explosive rat ever detonated in any sabotage operation. 0 boilers exploded from rat bombs. 0 German facilities were damaged by the devices. The entire program achieved complete operational failure. The first and only shipment of explosive rats was intercepted by German forces while en route to occupied France. Most sources place this interception in 1941 to 1942, though exact dating remains unclear in declassified SLE records. The circumstances of the interception are not documented in available files. German forces may have captured the shipment during a routine security sweep, discovered it through intelligence work, or seized it when an SOE agent was arrested. Following the interception, SOE immediately abandoned the explosive rat program. No further shipments were manufactured, no additional deployment attempts occurred. The 100 rats produced represented the program's entire output. One claim in a biography of Station 15 officer J. Elder Wills suggests 9 boilers were damaged in Belgian factories by explosive rats. However, MRD Foote, the official SOE historian commissioned by the British government with privileged access to classified records, explicitly states, "This claim is probably a myth. No primary source corroborates any successful deployment or detonation." The Imperial War Museum's Descriptive Catalogue of Special Devices and Supplies, Volume 2, issued in 1945, lists explosive rats under camouflage devices, alongside explosive soap, books, tins, and coal.
The catalog treats them as equipment examples rather than operational weapons with confirmed combat use. The German response to the discovery was remarkable and entirely unexpected. German authorities did not simply dispose of the captured rats. They studied them. Captured explosive rats were exhibited at top German military schools throughout the Reich as training aids for security personnel. German scientists analyzed the devices to understand British sabotage techniques and anticipate future threats. Specimens were photographed and documented. Security protocols were updated. Most significantly, German authorities organized extensive mass searches for dead rodents in boiler rooms and coal storage areas across occupied territories. The Germans believed, reasonably, that if one shipment of explosive rats existed, hundreds or thousands of similar devices might already be distributed throughout occupied Europe, waiting to be deployed. SOE's assessment of this outcome was documented in declassified files. The trouble caused to the Germans was a much greater success to Britain than if the rats had actually been used. The operation produced what SOE described as an extraordinary moral effect on German forces. From a cost-benefit perspective, the result was optimal. British expenditure ceased immediately.
After the interception, production stopped. No additional resources were invested. Meanwhile, German search operations consumed personnel, time, and attention indefinitely. Security forces inspected boiler rooms. Guards examined coal piles. Every dead rat discovered in occupied Europe became a potential threat, requiring investigation. The psychological burden was sustained and self-reinforcing. German personnel could never be certain when the threat had passed. Evidence of sustained German concern appears in multiple sources. Specimens were retained for training purposes long after the initial discovery. A captured example was found at Lyon police station in the 1990s, bearing French inspection labels dated 1942, suggesting systematic German security protocols remained active years after the actual threat disappeared. The Germans essentially weaponized their own thoroughness against themselves. Their institutional competence and security procedures became a liability when applied to a threat that no longer existed. The explosive rat program belonged to a broader SOE catalog of disguised sabotage devices developed between 1940 and 1945. Explosive coal was the most directly parallel concept. Developed in 1940 to 1941, explosive coal consisted of steel castings filled with plastic explosive and painted to resemble coal lumps. Approximately 3.5 tons were produced between 1941 and 1945. The devices were distributed to resistance networks throughout occupied Europe and reportedly achieved successful detonations in locomotive boilers and factory furnaces. Unlike the explosive rat, explosive coal saw extensive operational use with confirmed combat results. Though exact numbers of successful sabotage operations remain classified or undocumented, other SOE disguised weapons included incendiary cases containing thermite charges, explosive bicycle pumps, hollow tubes filled with explosives that appeared functional, landmines disguised as animal dung, molded and painted to match horse or cattle droppings, common in rural areas, explosive concealed in fruit tins and food containers, and camouflaged rock hiding places for storing weapons and documents. The SOE catalog listed dozens of such devices by war's end. Station 15 produced an entire inventory of everyday objects converted into weapons or concealment tools. German sabotage services developed equally ingenious disguised weapons. Declassified MI5 files note that German devices were as creative as those invented by SOE. The Abwehr developed chocolate bar bombs, steel explosive charges covered in real chocolate wrapping that appeared edible, stuffed dogs concealing explosive charges intended to be left in target areas, and explosive tins of plums and peas filled with plastic explosive and fitted with detonators. 4 explosive food tins were found on German agents who landed in Ireland during the war, allegedly intended for use against Buckingham Palace. German agents on Operation Pastorius in 1942 brought plastic explosives disguised as coal to sabotage American power plants, though all 8 saboteurs were captured before completing their mission. The American Office of Strategic Services pursued the conceptually related Bat Bomb under Project X-Ray. The concept involved bomb casings containing over 1,000 hibernating Mexican free-tailed bats.